Welcome back to another video. This video, I'm talking about underrated paint schemes on fallen flag railroads that I don't think are talked about very much, but are like better than the ones that are talked about. And these are just my opinions. If you don't like them, feel free to say something in the comments. But without further ado, let's get started. First up, we got Reading lines. And I think this is a very underrated paint scheme. Reading was a very big railroad too, and I think that people just don't talk about their paint scheme much, and I think it's one of the greatest. I would say it's in my top 10. I absolutely love this paint scheme. Next up, we got Central Vermont. This is not a very talked about railroad at all. Like, I rarely ever hear people talk about this railroad. And I think that this railroad uses the right colors for the region. The green fits very well with the scenery of Vermont, and yellow just is perfect choice to go with that. And they had a very impressive roster too. And this is just, not very talked about railroad. I think they have, you know, at least top 10 of my most favorite paint schemes. Next up, we got one of my favorite railroads, the Railway, and I think this is in my top five. This is just a great paint scheme. Again, this is not very talked about, and their steam locomotives too also were pretty impressive in terms of the paint schemes on them, especially like the lettering that they put. It was always big, that was how they were remembered. And they again had a very impressive roster of locomotives you wouldn't really find anywhere else, like the E33s and all the Fairbanks Morse locomotives too, like in this picture here. And I think, this is phenomenal paint scheme that people need to talk about more. This is another railroad that I love a lot, the Boston and Maine. I love their paint scheme that was on their F units and some of their switchers, the red and yellow one, not the blue one. I think it looks a lot like the Rock Islands blue paint scheme, but this one is like really good. I feel like they should have stuck with this on their like GP7s because that would look great. But I'm a big fan of this paint scheme. I love how the logo is put on the front there and the numbers just slightly above there. Um, I actually have a model of not this exact locomotive, but an F unit. Next up is the Seaboard Airline, not the Seaboard Coastline. Don't get that confused. But the Seaboard Airline had a lot of really different paint schemes. This is probably one of the most common ones, and this is a variation of the one that they would put on their E units too. I love both of those. They're basically the same, but these are like I love this paint scheme. I've always wanted to see the E unit that survived. I'm pretty sure there was one that survived. I want to see that one in person because this paint scheme is just imagine seeing this train going down the tracks. Imagine how beautiful that is. I mean, they don't make paint schemes like they used to. I wish some of the class ones would take a few hints. But after they merged with Atlantic Coastline, their paint schemes kind of went downhill from there. They just basically took Atlantic Coastline's paint scheme and put Seaboard Coastline over it on their Jeeps and stuff, like their GP35s. But this is phenomenal paint scheme. Next up on the list is the Bangor and Aroostook Railway. I love the Bangor and Aroostook, but they were kind of ruined by a certain Penn Central. They had a lot of paint schemes over the years for their diesels, and I think all of them are just amazing paint schemes. And there was actually a lot of survivors from the Bangor and Aroostook, and these are, you know, all of them are just phenomenal, great paint schemes. And I would love to actually see one of these locomotives that survived in person. That's on my bucket list to do because I love the railroads up north. They all had like some of the best paint schemes. I would say they all had the best paint schemes in the country. They were so much better than like Union Pacific and the other railroads out west too. Next up on our list is the Tennessee Central. They had two different kinds of paint schemes for their diesels over the years. They had like a red and gray paint scheme for their F and E units, which I also love that paint scheme too. But this paint scheme is a really cool paint scheme for their road units, and I think it's not very talked about. Like I don't really ever see anybody talk about the Tennessee Central's paint schemes. They were not the greatest railroad. They derailed everywhere and the track conditions was bad. But, for a lot of people, that was, what they saw growing up. And I think this is a very, good paint scheme. Next up, we got one of my favorite railroads of all time, and this is actually my favorite paint scheme of all time too, the Maine Central. This is not a very talked about railroad, and they were one of the smaller railroads up north. I mean, they were bigger than the Bangor and Aroostook, but they weren't as big as like New Haven and Boston, Maine. But this is the best paint scheme ever. Just look at this. Imagine seeing this nowadays. Imagine how cool that would be. And there's actually a lot of Maine Central survivors. Like if there's a scenic railroad called Conway Scenic Railway up somewhere up north. It might be in Maine. Can't remember, but they operate like two of these Jeeps that are painted in the Maine Central paint schemes, and they have a GP35 that was originally built for Norfolk and Western, but it's also painted up in Maine Central colors, and they've got a couple other units up there, and they operate, Maine Central territory too. They've actually started expanding. There's a big abandoned section up there, but they're slowly, restoring it to service. It's a very scenic railway from what I've seen. Next up is the original Norfolk Southern Railway. This is, if you know about this railroad, I've got mad respect for you. This railroad operated in Norfolk, Virginia, and then the rest of their trackage was on the coast of North Carolina. Um, they had some of the best paint schemes. They had like two different paint schemes, the one you see here and then the one in the back. One of these, this locomotive sister unit 1616, actually was preserved, and it's at Spencer, North Carolina. And I've actually seen that locomotive. It's very pretty. I love this paint scheme. I love both variations of it, and I think it's one of the best. This railroad's never talked about either. I think this railroad needs to be, talked about more. People often confuse it too with the current Norfolk Southern. So, and last but not least, we got the Lehigh Valley. They had a great paint scheme too. I love the stripes on the front of the locomotive and the yellow that they use with the red, the yellow stripes, and the lettering. I think this is a great paint scheme. They were, again, they're not very talked about. They're primarily a coal hauling railroad, like in, I think it was Pennsylvania. If I'm wrong, correct me on that. But they're a great railroad in my opinion, and I love seeing pictures of this railroad. I love their paint scheme. But that's going to be it for today's video. Please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot so I can keep doing these videos. And with that, I'll thank you guys so much for watching.